Well, hi, Stu Amy coming to you from Pawleys Island, South Carolina. I have a question for you. What do you do when you have a big problem and it's not going to go away? That's the story that Mark records in his gospel about a man and a daughter who's dying, his little daughter, and he has no answer and no way out and nowhere to turn. So I want to talk to you about the nature of pain and hurt and faith and fear and healing and miracles that Jesus still works in our lives today. Mark writes in chapter 5, verse 22, Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet and pleaded earnestly with him, My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live. So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. I want you to notice several things about this story. First of all, desperation. This man has a big problem. It is way too big for him to handle by himself. So Mark says, lo in the Greek, then on the same day. On the same day. What does that mean? Well, Jesus had just cast out a legion of demons from a man and thrown them into a herd of pigs. And then on that same day, a religious leader of a local synagogue, this man's important. He's a local church authority. His name is Jairus. And when he saw Jesus, he fell on his knees before Jesus. He's desperate. In the Greek, krisis. His little daughter is dying. It's an unexpected crisis, an unexpected crisis. It's causing high levels of anxiety and fear and uncertainty inside of him. I mean, his life is a wreck. All of a sudden, this big problem invades his life and he can't handle it. He is leveled. He's devastated. He's humbled. He is brought to his knees. What's the problem? My little daughter. In the Greek, that word little is only. My only daughter, my one of a kind, special, unique. She's the delight of my eyes. She's in the fullness of youth, probably 10 or 12 years old. She has a bright future. She will get married. She will have children. She will have grandchildren for me. But she's dying. She's dying. She's slowly sinking into death. The clock is ticking and time is running out. Now, I think it's interesting. He doesn't present his credentials. I'm a big religious leader, a big shot here in town. That's all over right now. He's in such a mess, such a big problem that he just throws himself at the feet of Jesus and says, I need help. Come quickly. Put your hands on her so that she could be healed, so that she can live. I love that. He says, yeah, I want her to live. He's desperate. He's got a problem too big to handle. Can you come? And Jesus looks at him and he says, yeah, I'll come. I'll come with you. And he went with him. Now, Mark is careful to note there is a large crowd following Jesus, pressing on all sides, squeezing and pushing. Everyone wants to see what Jesus will do next. So what happens next in our story? Well, in Mark chapter 5, verse 25 to 34, I'm not going to read it for you, but while he's going, there is this sudden interruption. A woman with an unrelenting flow of blood. She's been sick, unclean for 12 years. That's right, unclean. She's declared unclean by the religious leaders. She's not permitted in the temple or to worship God. What's happening here is that Mark is going to contrast the significance of Jairus, the religious leader, with the insignificance of this woman. He's important. She's unwelcome. He came in public. She comes hiding and sneaking up behind him and touches the hem of the garment of Jesus, and instantly her bleeding is stopped. I want you to notice here the second part of faith and how faith grows in our lives and how we handle difficult problems. There's the desperation. Help me. I need help. Then there's the delay. Faith grows through waiting. Can you imagine the scene? Jairus is looking over his shoulder. He wants to get to his house as quickly as possible. His daughter is dying. When he looks over his shoulder, he sees Jesus stop and talk to a woman. What are you doing? My only daughter, my little one, is dying. I want you to notice, you and me, that faith always has a dimension of delay to it. Whatever our dilemma, I'll bet we have to wait on an answer for our prayers and for our needs. I often say there are 4 answers that God gives us to prayer: yes, no, you'll have to wait, and I have a better plan. Well, what's happening here is that God tells Jairus, you have to wait. Mark continues the story in 5:35. While Jesus was still speaking, some of the people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead, they said. Why bother the teacher anymore? The third component of faith and how we deal with difficult problems in our lives is doubt. Faith grows through uncertainty. While Jairus is waiting, while this woman is healed, the crowd begins to cheer and shout. They're screaming and yelling. A miracle has occurred in this woman. And all of a sudden, in the midst of their shouting and cheering, a voice rings out. Your daughter, she's dead. And their shouts of joy turn to silence, disbelief. There must be a big mistake here. The girl, the daughter, the little one, the child, 10 to 12 years old, died. Wait a minute. A woman was healed. A child is dead. I know for parents that our greatest nightmare is the loss of a child. When I view tragedies on TV, on the news of little children dying in a school shooting or through illnesses or whatever it is, my heart breaks. It's a tragic event. And I can't help but think it could have been my child who died. Death is cold and harsh and irreversible and final. It's not supposed to happen. And it's really not supposed to happen to a little kid. So Jairus starts to ask, where were you when I needed you? I mean, now it's too late. That's when the doubt sets in. He loses all hope. He's filled with uncertainty. And the crowd is saying, you could have healed her when she was alive. Now she's dead. There's nothing you can do. Mark 5:36. Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, don't be afraid, just believe. When big problems hit, there's that desperation, then there's a delay, and then there's doubt, and then there's a decision, Jesus said. Faith grows through choices. Believe. Jesus had overheard them talking, and he said, don't listen to them. Don't be afraid. Don't give way to doubt. Don't let fear take hold of your heart. The fact is that most of the time, fear is a worthless emotion. It can't change the past or the present or control the future. In fact, psychologists tell us that it is an acquired skill. The more we worry, the better we get at it. The good news is, if fear is something that we learn, it's also something we can unlearn. The good news is that there's an antidote to fear, and that's faith, that's belief. Jairus has a decision to make: to live his life in uncertainty and fear and doubt, or to believe. And once he makes that decision about who he believes in, who he trusts, then he will face life differently and his faith will grow. Faith is a choice. Mark goes on about this decision, 5:37. He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep. But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in where the child was. Back at the house, events are moving quickly. The Hebrew tradition was to hire professional mourners. And the more significant the person or the death, the greater the mourners, the more they had. The house is filled with loud crying, wailing people, professionals. And Jesus turns to the professionals and he says, she's not dead. She's asleep. Now, we have to understand that in the Greek, death and sleep are words that are used interchangeably. When Jesus talks about Lazarus being dead, he tells his sisters and his family, Lazarus has fallen asleep. And that's what he tells these professional mourners. But what do? They laugh at him. We're professionals. We know death when we see it. She's dead. So Jesus puts them all out. He sends away the doubters. He doesn't want doubt around. Faith is a choice. Jesus doesn't deny that she's dead. He's denying that death is final. It's not ultimate. It's not the ultimate power in life. I am. So put your doubt away. Make a decision to trust and believe in me. So Mark concludes 5:41. He took her by the hand and said to her, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. And she was 12 years old. At this they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. Here we have the deliverance of Jesus. She's released. There's dynamite. There's power here. He takes Peter and James and John, his closest associates, and the mother and the father Jairus, not the synagogue leader now. He's not the synagogue leader. He's the father. And they went in where the child was and gathered around. The mourners, the doubters, they're gone. He takes her hand. He touches her with all of the power and authority of God. And he says, Talith Kuma, little girl, I say to you, get up. This is the present imperative. It is a command. Get up. And immediately she stood and opened her eyes, and she was looking directly into the face of Jesus. She stands around, she walks, she smiles, she embraces her mother and their father. Jesus has unleashed all the power of heaven on the enemy, death. And all the spiritual beings in hell, the devil included, are watching and trembling in terror. It's like a nuclear explosion when he touched her. I'm in charge around here, not anybody else. Remember, we said that when a miracle is done by Jesus in the New Testament, there is a present reality, a person is healed, and there's an eternal truth that he's teaching. Jesus raised people from the dead 3 times in the New Testament, and every time it was about restoring broken relationships. Jairus and his daughter, Lazarus and his brother and sister, the widow of Nain with her only son. Jesus will do anything to restore relationships, especially the relationship between him and us, and between us and God. The parents, Peter, James, and John, they're astonished. But Jesus says, keep this to yourself. It's not time yet to tell everyone who I am. But give her something to eat. Now, it's not unusual in a hospital after surgery that you wait for that moment when somebody can eat something. That's a sort of a milestone. And he says, get her something to eat, anything. This is a good sign. She's healthy. She's restored. She's brought back to life. The present reality, the daughter's raised and healed. There's the eternal truth. I'm all about reconciliation, restoration, and not just between people, but between you and God, that we've broken our relationship with God. We're dead in our sins, but God brings us back from the dead. He brings us back to life by restoring our relationship with him. Jesus brings you and me back to life, an eternal relationship with God. That's the eternal truth that Jesus is teaching. So when problems hit us dead in the face, there's the desperation. The dilemma is just too big for us to handle. God's putting things in perspective. I mean, if I said to you, what is your number one problem today? Write it down. What is it that you want to bring to God? Fall on your knees and beg him, plead with him, tell him what it is. Secondly, there's the delay. Faith grows through waiting. Yes, no, not now. I have a better plan. What is God trying to say to you? Where are you in that process? And a part of faith is doubt. Faith grows through walking through uncertain futures. uncertain times. And there's a decision. Faith is a choice to believe. Yeah, I'm going to trust in you. I know there's going to be doubt in that trust, but I'm going to trust. And then there's the deliverance. There is the dynamite. Death is not final. God is. And if he can deal with life and death, he can deal with your problem and mine today. Now, keep in mind, the great miracle that Jesus works here is not only that a girl was healed, but that our relationship with God is restored. We got broken with God. Life got broken. And when life got broken, we died. And God has come through his son, Jesus Christ, to restore our relationship, bring us back to life. Little one, stand, rise, walk, eat. God's grace is fully sufficient for you and me to speak to any situation. And maybe through this story of the religious leaders and a sick woman and a dying little girl and a bunch of mourners, you can come to know this day miracles that Jesus still works in your life and mine.